Welcome back to Dirt Road Believer for day 3 of our study on the book of Esther called Divine Constellation. It is July, so happy July. If you're just catching up, I encourage you to go back to Monday. That was sort of the introduction to our study, and it introduced this concept of divine constellation in our lives and how that all works and fits into the book of Esther. You also heard a song on Monday by my sweet little friend Brianne. And then yesterday we got into chapters 1 and 2. So in chapter 1 we met the very powerful, uber wealthy King Xerxes, whose wife and queen did not please him. He got sort of agitated with her. And so, away with her, you can no longer be my king. Leave our 3 sons that we had together, but she was gone. So therefore he was in need of a new queen. And that's where Esther comes in. Now, Esther was a very sweet little Jewish girl from Susa, which is the province where the king of Persia, Xerxes, lived. And her name was Hadassah. Her name was changed when she went to the palace to a very Persian name Esther, which means star, to conceal her identity as a Jew. She was under the direction of her adoptive father, Mordecai, to conceal her identity and not to let anyone in the palace, especially the king, know that she was a Jew. Mordecai, I said, was her adoptive father, and he adopted her after her parents were killed. So that catches us up to chapter 3 today. 4 years has passed from the end of chapter 2 to the beginning of chapter 3. I know in a short book like this, it's easy to think that it all happens within 6 months or even a year, but 4 years has passed. That means that Esther is now 19 years old. She became queen when she was 15. Now she's 19, and the book opens up, or the chapter opens up. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. So enters a new person on the scene. His name is Haman. It does not tell us why he was elevated to this honored position, but things are revealed later on about his character. It probably was not on the up and up. So here's Haman with all this power underneath the king, and he runs into Mordecai quite often, comes in contact with him because Mordecai is still hanging around the king's gate, hanging outside the palace, and he's keeping an eye on Esther. Well, it comes to the attention of Haman that Mordecai will not bow down to him. Now, Jews did bow down to kings during this time, but there was a long history between the Jews and the Amalekites, which Haman is a part of that tribe, and he refuses to bow down. I'm sure Mordecai also is not fond of the pompous, pretentious person that Haman is, and so he does not bow down. Haman does not like this, and we mentioned that in this book, one of the themes is pairs. So we saw where the king didn't just seek to punish his wife because he was humiliated and his power was downgraded by her. He sought to punish all wives. Well, we see that here with Haman too. It's not enough for Haman to just punish Mordecai. He wants to punish all Jews, and I think that is a characteristic of humans is that we tend to lump people together and make grand generalizations about people and begin to view all people the way we experience just one person. And so Haman is out to kill all the Jews. He's gonna, because of this one Jew, Mordecai, he wants to annihilate and get rid of every Jew. So he goes about this in verse 8. It says, "Then Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all the other people, and who do not obey the king's laws." This wasn't even true. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. So if it pleases the king, let there be a decree issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver. We have a huge lie of omission here. He has omitted who this group of people even are. It's the Jews. People fear the Jews because they are God's people. He left that detail out, and then he also adds a little bribe to the situation. Now, this bribe was 2/3 of what his annual salary was. So chances are he was not generously going to give that. He was going to take the plunder from the Jews when they were annihilated and put that into the treasury. So we begin to see that Haman is a very devious and underhanded kind of guy who has it within him to kill off the entire Jewish race. So we're not getting good vibes from him already. Let's look at verse 7. I'm kind of backing up here because it says, in the 12th year of King Xerxes. So now within just 7 verses, we've already shifted to another year ahead. So now Esther is 20 years old. That's important to know for when we get to chapter 4. And then verse 12 through 15, Haman plans to do this by, similar to what we saw the king do when he wanted to put husbands as the rulers of their household in verse 1. He's going to send out a letter, and this letter is going to go to all 127 provinces. It's going to be written in every single language and dialect that everyone speaks so that everyone will know what's going on. But so he writes a letter, and it's an order, and the king seals it with his signet ring so that everyone knows this has to be carried out, and it is for the annihilation of all the Jews. However, the king doesn't know that part. All right, that brings us to chapter 4. So here we begin to see Mordecai as such an influence in Esther's life. And I want to start with a pretty big thing here. Never in the book of Esther is God mentioned. Never in the book of Esther is prayer mentioned. And you ask, why would we have a book of the Bible and God not be in it? Well, God is in it. And I think that's one of the author's intentions. You know, our setting is a very secular setting. We're in the palace of the king of Persia. They do not worship God. However, they do know of God, and they do know of God's people. But that is not mentioned. And many, you know, if you read and study this, many people say that that's kind of the point. Without putting God in there, you're showing that God is woven through every bit of this story. And even though prayer is not mentioned, we know that prayer does take place, as evidenced by what's in chapter 4. So, in verse 4, it says, when Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. Mordecai has learned of the plan for all the Jews to be killed, and he, along with many other Jews, are in mourning. They are in sackcloth and ashes. That means that they are wearing a material, a very scratchy material that sacks were made of. They are putting ashes on their head. And that kind of takes us back to a verse in Genesis chapter 3 that says, from dust you are, and to dust you will return. It's a way of being humble before the Lord and saying, Lord, I know that we are only dust and we will soon return to the dust, but please have mercy on us and take notice of our mourning. And so Esther is told about her uncle's great distress, and she sends clothes and tells the eunuch, tell him to put on clothes. It's distressing her, and he refuses. And she wants to know why. Why is he in mourning? And so one of the eunuchs, by now people people in behind the scenes are aware of her nationality. They're aware that Mordecai is her uncle, and they're concerned for her. You can tell that she's very well liked. So they go back to Mordecai and ask what's going on, and he reveals what the edict that has just been sent out, that the Jews are going to be annihilated. And so they come back and tell Esther this, and Esther is scared, because what else comes back is in chapter 12. In verse 12, this is a very famous part of this chapter. In this book it says, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back his answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. I love this part right here, because he is believing in the promise that, of course, the Jews are not going to be annihilated. But here he has a daughter that is in the king's palace, that has it within her power to act and to do something. But he recognizes, look, even if you don't do it, God's going to raise somebody else up and they're going to do it. The Jews will not be annihilated. That's so powerful to me, and maybe you've experienced that. Have you ever been nudged to do something and you know it's the Holy Spirit, but you don't do it, and you see it played out through another person? The very same thing that you were supposed to do is done through someone else. That's no new concept. God always does that. If he says it, it will be so. And if you're not willing to step up and do it, then he will use someone else. Let's go on. From there it says, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, love this, but that you have come to a royal position for a time such as this. That verse is so powerful, and that verse speaks to you and I. You have been positioned. And your timing and your place that you've positioned all comes under that divine constellation. We see up until now how, just as a 14-year-old girl who's been orphaned, who's lost her parents, who has had to lose her virginity to someone that she never wanted to, how all of this is beginning to come together, and God is connecting it all the people, all the places that she's been and where she's going, for this moment right here. God does that with us too. He seasons us. He brings us through trials. He puts us in the path of people and takes us to places where our position is for a time such as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. She's like, I'm on it. This, those words, she needed to hear that. And isn't that true of us, that there are people in our path that we may not see what we're capable of, but they do, and they say, you know what? This is your time. This is your time. You've got to take a hold of this. And if you don't have people in your life like that will stand up and say to you, this is your time, you need to do this, then surround yourself. I try to surround myself with people like that will, if I can't see it, they will speak it into me. And Mordecai is that person for Esther. So Esther is like, let's take action. Let's do this. It may mean my death, but I'm gonna die trying. And so Esther says, go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And my maids will fast too. Her maids weren't Jewish, but she's gone back and told her maids, you're going to fast with me. Now, fasting was never alone. It always accompanied prayer. And even though God and prayer are not mentioned in this book, we know that they are there. So here again, we have the theme of pairs. We've got 2 fasts going on. We had some of the Jews who, when they learned of this annihilation, they immediately began fasting, mourning, praying. And now that Esther is going to approach the king about this, she has ordered that all Jews participate in this fast, and she's gotten some people who aren't Jews too. Corporate fast is something that my church does at the beginning of every new year, and it is a unification, and it is a way to say, God, we are hungering for what you want. And so you take away that aspect of physically feeding yourself, and you begin to hunger. And I love the way Jensen Franklin talks about fasting, how that gurgling of the stomach, that every time it gurgles, it's crying out to God and saying, God, not my way, but your way. And think about that in multiples when you add all the Jews, that yearning for the Lord. All right, let's move on to chapter 5. So on the third day, Esther puts on her royal robe. She is going to go to the king and she is going to ask something big, to basically take that, that order you wrote, that signet, it's been sent out to all the 127 provinces. Could we just change that? She is going to lay bare what's really going on with Haman and this order, because he doesn't know. And again, here we have pairs. There are going to be 2 banquets coming up. And the first one, she invites the king to, and he says, look, sweetheart, you are a knockout. Whatever you want, up to half my kingdom, you can have it. And Esther says, this is in verse 7, my petition and my request is this: if the king regards me with my favor, and it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet. I will prepare for them tomorrow. There's going to be another banquet, and I will answer the king's question. She could have asked right then. In fact, he said, ask me whatever you want, I'll give it to you, but she didn't. And women, do we really have to ask ourselves why she wanted another banquet? Are you married? Don't you know that there is a right time and a wrong time to ask your husband a question and to present important stuff that matters a lot to you? Okay, so it's that woman's intuition. She's 20 now. She's growing into her swag, and she's been around this man long enough. She knows she's setting the stage. Oh, are we not good at that, ladies? We set the stage. We can do that. So she's using it for that reason. The Holy Spirit has something else in mind. And look what happens at the end of verse 5. This is great. This is setting us up for tomorrow. So Haman's rage against Mordecai. Haman goes home and he's like, I have been invited to a banquet by the queen all by myself tomorrow. Look at me. I'm wealthy. I have an awesome house. I have all these sons. The only thing that is just putting a wet blanket on my life is that Jew Mordecai. He will not bow down to me. And so his lovely wife, Zeresh, I do not recommend naming your children after her. She's hideous. She says, have a gallows built 75 feet high and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go to the king and the dinner and be happy. And this suggestion delighted Haman. Apparently his wife was just as evil as he was. That wraps up chapter 5 today. This has been fun. So tomorrow I need you to read chapter 6 and chapter 7. And we're going to get right back into it tomorrow. I hope you have enjoyed this study called Divine Constellation, and you've began to see how God's weaving all this together. So another cliffhanger for tomorrow. Slow down, take the dirt road, believer.